Hi, welcome back to the Hornthrowers podcast. We're joined by Tom from Celestial Sanctuary. Really happy to have you on.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome.
So we'll start off with like a very sort of simpler question. So when you guys are on stage, you always say about being the new wave of British death metal. Do you want to
Mhm.
like elaborate on that and maybe go into like the whole new British death metal scene?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I think it's probably quite important to clarify that it's nothing about sort of like being proud to be British or anything corny like that. It's basically just so my thinking was that there's been a bunch of great death metal bands in the UK up until like modern times where you've got like Cruciamentum and Grave Miasma, and it's nothing sort of like to say like, oh, we're like new, they're old, but it's kind of like a reset button, or kind of like just an element or a degree of separation from what has come before. Just because I noticed that there's a few bands popping up and we were all very similar mindset. We all come from quite a very similar background with like, be it like a punk or a hardcore punk background. And I think that in itself kind of like instills certain ethics that you take with you into death metal. And as well, it was, the time that we were coming up, I mean, it's kind of died down and we were probably on the sort of like tail end of it, but it just seemed like a lot of the extreme music was all about like dismembering and like sexually abusing women, and it's just like we wanted to distance ourselves from that like as much as we could. And like I say, it's nothing, I'm not insinuating that all of the other bands did it, but it was a trend that we just wanted to like distance ourselves from, like, you know absolutely, essentially. So yeah, when I sort of like, when I say that on stage, when I sort of like talk about it in interviews, it's kind of just, it's my way of sort of like pushing these bands that are now my friends and just like grouping us together, because there is a sense of community around it, and like, we all know each other, we all like chat quite a lot and stuff, and go to each other's shows or like see each other at shows and stuff. And it's just, I think it just gives it a certain sense of community, and I think it removes any sort of like competition that usually seems to be in metal scenes that is kind of absent from hardcore and punk scenes. So it's kind of just bringing that into the more sort of like metal scene.
Well, what's interesting there is you're talking about coming from like a hardcore punk background and things like that. The kind of that original wave of British death metal did come from that background. Like we had Carl Willits on the show from Bolt Thrower recently, and he was talking about how like kind of the anarcho politics that he got from that punk scene translated under like Napalm Death, Carcass. They took a lot of stuff like that as well. So it's kind of interesting. You're talking about a reset button, but it's also in a way the things that you're bringing, trying to bring to the fore are actually stuff that's kind of like instilled from the beginning in a way. I mean, you even take your name from Bolt Thrower, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, like that's absolutely right. And I think like, I may be wrong with the band, but I'm pretty sure like Bolt Throwers formed in the toilets of a discharge gig. like,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, and that's the thing, and that's kind of what makes me laugh when like a lot of death metal fans will kind of be like, "Oh, hardcore kids playing death metal." It's like, well, like, what do you think it was? Like, where do you think it came from? And I just find that really funny. And at the same time, like, why should there be separation? We're all from the underground. We're all sort of like trying to do stuff ourselves. So like, why be annoyed about it? But yeah, like you say, it's just that's where it comes from originally. So it's sort of paying tribute to that in a way.
Yeah, and I mean, like, probably all of the bands that we've had on that, like, newer bands that we found most interesting, we've noticed, like, one commonality from them is coming more from a punk background than a metal background. And, like, the kind of, the love of, like, metal came later, like, Dawn Raid, the sort of, like, black metal band. They came from, like, playing punk squats and things like that, and then, but really wanted to play black metal, and then sort of, it's been something later in life that they've done. And it's kind of cool bringing those ethics into
Yeah.
the metal scene, I
I
think.
think there's a massive crossover with punk and metal anyway. I know like Steve Harris hates punk, even though I'd say the first Iron Maiden albums like Paul Di'Anno is like a punk singer.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's a bigger crossover than people like to admit. But so you're talking about like the lyrical themes, like trying to take it in a different direction to the other sort of things people were talking about. How important is it to have like the putrid aesthetic to death metal? It sort of reminds me of like 80s movies with like wet puppets and stuff, and just like 80s like gore kind of like
Yeah.
where it's like you can tell it's not real, but it's like
You've actually
it.
got wet puppets in your
Yeah,
notes.
my notes say wet puppets.
I love that. So it was how important is it to get that sort of thing into the lyrics? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
Or
basically
yeah.
the long way round.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, for me, like you touched on, like it's wanting to get away from certain things. And there's when the band first started, it was very serious. I mean, when I started, I was like a lot more of a, I would say, militant vegan. Not so much now. I just say that I live on a plant-based diet.
Yeah, that's what we're like as well. It starts off as like arguing with my dad for making chicken
Yeah,
dinners, and now I'm just like, you do you.
yeah,
Yeah, but
exactly.
I've been vegan for 10 years and I'm just too tired to get goaded into arguments about it now.
Well,
Yeah,
as a
exactly.
tangent, I got reminded by your Twitter of a guy called the Burger Dude who makes like vegan burgers. I
Oh
just saw
yeah.
you tweeted it and I was like, oh my God, I remember this guy. And I've watched his videos so much lately.
Yes. Yeah, he makes some really great stuff. It's
Yeah.
definitely inspired me in the kitchen quite a lot. Um, but yeah, so like when we first started, like my lyrics were very much like had a big undertone of veganism, and it still follows through now. Like the thing that I hate the most is like the factory farming industry, and it's like that's probably where Carcass get a lot of their lyrical inspiration, and I
Yeah.
think Coffin Mulch do as well, because that's like the goriest thing there is, right? So it's kind of like pairing that up with like this sort of like existentialism and body horror, I guess. Like you mentioned, like the 80s movies with wet puppets, so like David Cronenberg sort of films and stuff like that, and it's more in that direction than it is like hacking someone to bits. It's more about hacking yourself to bits
Yeah.
without the, you're not self-harm way, but you know what I mean, like just that sort of like really, there's quite a horrible subject, I think, and it was my way of doing it that was kind of, not that I was like treading new ground, but to me it was kind of like, oh, this is kind of like a different perspective of writing these things.
Yeah. Yeah, that does make sense though, with like the sort of the factory farming thing in death metal do
And
go
like
very
the
well
carcass
together.
thing's definitely accurate because I know that Jeff Walker had been like I think he's been like vegan since the 80s and I think he's still like I'm not sure if it's still a thing that but he used to take part in like hunt saboteuring and things like that as well. So that's definitely again kind of something that like has been part of the DNA of death metal from the beginning, but kind of got lost along the way with like I think like definitely maybe like more of the kind of like the Florida scene of like kind of like Cannibal Corpses and all of that.
Yeah.
Mm.
I was gonna say as well, so you guys seem like a really hard working band. So I know like we first saw you when you supported Gatecreeper in Manchester,
It's an
and then
amazing show.
we went to go see Undeath. You didn't make it because you were running to get the train
And then
and you dropped your phone and broke your phone. So me and my partner, I think I
Oh.
spoke to you at the booth at that point. I spent way too much money on merch.
Oh, okay.
I was like, for some reason, I was at this point where I was like, money's no object. I can buy as much merch at shows as I want. And then it gets to a point where you've spent all your money. You're just like, oh,
and you're just like sitting like a dragon on top of
yeah,
a mound of stinky black t-shirts.
yeah. And then, so yeah, there were those two gigs, and then you guys are playing Night of Salvation at Damnation, aren't you, as well?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
And then it always seems like you're sort of on the bill of any death metal show we're gonna go to.
Yeah, I got to I mean that's just the fan in me that is kind of like, I see something's announced or I get wind of something that's coming over and I'm like, either to our booking agent or I probably know the promoter because I've been playing music for years. So I'm just like straight on it, like, can we please play the show? Like, we'll play we've driven up to Manchester for like 50 quid, and it's cost us like 250 quid to get there. But it's kind of like we just see it as like, well, we're fans of this band, like it's our way to like get to go and like see them, and like it's almost like the playing of the show is kind of secondary because we just want to be there and be watching the show.
I think it's also like that level of exposure as well. Because if you're going to support bands that have been massive inspirations to yourself, chances are people in the crowd will resonate with your band, and you'll get to, kind of spread out to people who are hopefully going to be more receptive. So it's maybe worth taking the loss in the short term of like, the long term of building the band, I suppose.
Oh, 100%. And I mean the biggest one that actually happened, and it's kind of weird to say because I think like people often like compare us to Obituary. I don't know if it's just because of my register of voice or just like the pacing of the songs, but that's always been a band that people have like compared us to. And when we got on that show, obviously, excuse me,
No,
to play with some of our heroes was just like nuts to begin with. But the sort of like main thing that I took away from that was that usually the crowds that we play to are like a lot younger. They're sort of either between my age and your age. I'm guessing you two are a little bit younger than I am, but
We're like, well, you're nearly 30 and I'm
can you stop
27.
saying it like that?
well, I'm 35, so yeah. But yeah, with the Obituary show, that was definitely a turning point. That we had a lot of like older people coming up to us, and a lot of people that, I think people will always assume that like the older crowd are just so stubborn about new bands, and that's definitely true. And that was kind of like the the sort of soundbite of the night, as like, I never really listened to anything new, but you guys were sick. So it's kind of like, that was nice. And it was nice to get that sort of like different crowd, the old people that had been there, the old people.
Well, we got that response from Carl Willits because we were trying to like talk to him about like what new bands excite him and stuff like that, and we were actually planning to kind of have it as a segue to mention yourselves as well, and
okay.
to kind of like probe and see if he was like aware of you guys, because obviously taking your name from Bolt Thrower, etc. And then he just was like,
yeah, I don't listen to anything new. And we're like, he's like, oh, I just listen to the same bands from the 80s.
yeah, he's like, I just listened to the same 5 like hardcore punk bands or whatever.
It's so typical, isn't it? It's hilarious.
Yeah. My favorite thing from that interview though was that it was like getting dark, and he was slowly getting like,
oh yeah,
more. His green screen was just becoming green screen, and I was like, you need to put your light on. And he was talking about like the Holocaust, and it was really serious, and I was like, he was fading into the background, and I was like,
a really serious topic, and the visuals did not match.
yeah, and I was just like, it looks like I'm laughing at this. I'm laughing at it.
And he's like talking about, he was talking about how he's like recently fallen out with somebody because they're a Holocaust denier, and then like,
and I'm just like, please, can you put your light on in the room you're in?
Oh no. Did he put it on in the end, or did he just turn?
I had to tell him, and then he put the light on.
My favorite bit was just that we got, the famous story of them like fighting a gang of neo-Nazis in New Jersey, and them like him like wielding like a baseball bat or something, whatever.
Yeah, I forgot my voice.
But yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I wonder if if that helped inspire that film, The Green Room. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I never thought I could hate Patrick Stewart.
That's what I was going to say.
Oh, right.
But I guess that's range, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that film's crazy though. Because I remember I'd never seen it, and you and my partner were like, "No, you've got to watch this film." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I didn't expect it to get that gory either.
No, I think as well, like whenever like our people are like represented in films like that, it's always very much like a corny, like, it's usually like a big dude who like gets off like a motorbike, and it's like he's the horrible one. But it's kind of like, I think the band that are in that, the non-Nazis, were like such a good like representation, and it's like it felt like the director had actually like been to shows and like knew what they're actually like. It's like the backstage room wasn't some like glamorous thing. The gig wasn't on like some strip in LA where it's just like so glamorous and stuff. It was like, that's such a good representation of what playing shows in the uh, I don't know if I can say it, bum end of nowhere.
Yeah.
Now all I can think of is like that film, but set in like where Motley Crue came from with a band like Motley Crue.
Well, like it's interesting, like talking about like the kind of representation there because it's really weird because especially in a lot of media you see like the metal kid being like the bully in the school
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff like that, and it's like no, this is like the complete antithesis of we were the weird little dweebs that were getting picked on, and like in my experience, and I've noticed in media more recently there's been a kind of better representation of that, and it's probably just because people who've been into metal and grown up with it have aged up to a point where they can make their own films now, and like Stranger Things being like maybe a goodish example of that, where it's like no, the metalheads in that situation are just nerds that play D&D in a basement.
Yeah,
So,
there's.
what was I going to say
I
next?
was going to say there's a film that came out. It had Nick Cave's son in it. I can't remember what it's called, but he's like, what's it called? Oh, yeah, Days of the Bagnelled Summer. I don't know if you've seen that, but yeah, it's
No.
Nick Cave's son. He's playing like a metalhead, but it's like there's even like old Empire posters and like death metal posters like in his room that is obviously like you'd only know who they were if you're involved, and yeah, so that kind of touches on it as well. And he's just like an awkward teenager, so that really like resonated with me as well.
No, it's good to see that we're not just like depicted as the bullies with mullets and
Now all I thought you said Nick Cage at first. Now all I can think of is Mandy with like the Celtic Frost sword. Yeah,
Oh
oh
yeah.
that film was a trip.
yeah.
I've not actually seen that yet.
It's an experience.
Yeah, I've got it on Blu-ray because I'm a nerd. So I can't do it.
Same. I think I'm actually looking at it right now.
My eyesight's not good enough to see your shelf, so
But yeah, I'd recommend it, but like it's very intense.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
um,
every time I've gone to put it on, it's been quite late at night, and it's probably not the best thing to watch before bed.
No,
we had like a small party once and watched it, didn't we? But I don't think anyone paid attention apart from us. We were just like, look at this bit. This is this sword. It's like it's an axe, isn't it? It's like this. Look at the Celtic Frost
Yeah, it
logo, and
looks like
people are
that.
just like drunk and don't care. And we're like, no, please.
I think we were the only two metalheads in the room as well, which didn't help.
Yeah,
Sorry, this is a big digression.
it's always digress. Uh, so yeah, your new album, Insatiable Thirst For Torment, is out on August 25th, and you've already released like 2 singles.
Mhm.
That slap.
Yeah, which we've played on the radio twice. Well,
Oh,
not more twice. We played them more than twice. We played both songs. How is this record sort of different to the one you've done before? Because I've noticed it seems like cleaner, not in like a lyrical sense, but in terms of like everything seems tighter.
Like production.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
think
what I meant.
there's just less reverb. Everything. That's all it is. No, it's so from the production point of view, I just basically I'd learned more since the last time around. The first album was the first thing that I ever produced and mixed. This is the second thing I've ever produced and mixed, and it's just I actually just took more time with it. I guess as well, like when you've recorded something and you've sort of like you've listened back to those mixes like 100 times, and then you start like playing them in the live environment, you start to see like, oh, this wasn't really like right last time around. So from a production point of view, yeah, it's a bit cleaner, but only in the sense that we want we want people to be able to hear like the riffs more. Like I just didn't want my vocals drenched in so much reverb. Drums was pretty much the same. There's probably a little bit less reverb on there, but it's kind of as well just sort of, at the time we were, or I was, because I was the one mixing it, I was listening to a lot of the more sort of like murky and cavernous death metal that was going around. Like, not that Tomb Mold are a particularly cavernous band, but that was like at the time, like Manner of Infinite Forms and Planetary Clairvoyance is just what was on repeat constantly. So it's probably like to do with like a lot of influence from that. Excuse me. And then this time around, just like I say, just wanting people to be able to hear everything like a little bit more. And then from like the sort of like songwriting and the style, I think we've retained like our sound. I think it still sounds like us, but just a better version of what came before, I hope. And I know from like a songwriting perspective that, I took a lot more time this time around, and I've said it in a couple of interviews where with the last album, I was very much like priding myself on like how quickly I could do it. I was, not spending longer than a day on the music, like the riffs and stuff of the song and the structure, and then not spending any longer than a day on the vocals or lyrics or whatever. So that was very much like there was not less thought, but it was kind of like that was kind of like the mission from the outset. That's just what I was trying to do with all the songs. This time around, started writing it like essentially straight after the album was released. So that's like it's over 2 years now that I started writing it, and the process of it is the first time I've ever done pre-production demos where I could listen to what was going to be recorded, listen to the song. Excuse me, my voice is. One sec. Yeah, so I could actually like listen to the songs in my car, listen on my headphones in the commute, and just see like, well, how can I make this bit like 5% better? And it just ended up being that, like the whole process was just like, right, this bit could be just that little bit better. It could be a bit more technical. The riff could be a little bit better and more interesting. And that was the process. And as well, I think obviously while you're writing, and the fact that this one took a lot longer, I think there's a lot more influence from other bands as well, as opposed to just a handful of bands, because that was in a much shorter period of time. This was a longer period of time, so naturally there's just more influence in the style of the songs.
Do you notice then that so as you were writing it, you can like pick out like certain songs, like, oh, that song was inspired when I was heavily listening to this, and vice versa? Because I know I tend to listen to things like the same thing a lot, and then I'll look back and be like, what the hell? I've not listened to this band in like a year.
Yeah. Just like, it sounds like you kind of do the same as me, is just like hyper fixate on a certain amount of bands, and that's all I listen to for a certain amount of time. But like I haven't listened to Tomb Mold for ages now. Like I think
I have.
Well, what's an absolute nightmare is the fact that like we've sort of been off and on in a band for like about like a year and a half, and depending on what gig you've been to recently, you'll come back and be like, no, we are a death metal band now. We are not playing black metal anymore.
I was like, now I can't like death metal. And then I was like, I've got all these death metal riffs. And then now we're back to playing like atmospheric black metal, because we've been listening to loads of like Caladan Brood, and it's like
that's the way though, isn't it? Like I think you are a product of like what you listen to, and that's exactly how like inspiration should work. I think you should come away from a gig like feeling inspired and be like, I want to do this. I mean, I think that's probably the same as me, that it's just kind of like that's our sort of like punishment for being a musician, is that we can't listen to something without over analyzing it and being like, oh, I could do this, I could write something like this, instead of just like enjoying it for what it is.
The weirdest thing I found is, the band Worm. When I heard that, what was it? The one with like the green cover. I was like, oh, this is
one with like lurking in swamps of festering excrementia.
No, that's a different band.
Is it? Sorry.
No,
Gloom Lord? Evergloom or something like that?
I was like, oh, this is a death metal album. And then I follow them on Instagram, and they're posting like Dungeon Synth and all this black metal stuff. And then now they're like a black metal band wearing goofy outfits on stage and doing fake sacrifices. And I'm like, what has happened here? What is this guy been listening to? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, what a trajectory.
I know. But I found like this like band from like the 90s. I can't find it anywhere apart from YouTube, but it's like this dungeon synth thing, and I'm like obsessed with it. And it came out the day I was born, I found.
Oh,
And I'm
really?
like, I can't find it anywhere, and it's they're like Italian. But then it's like they don't ever post on their Instagram what it is. I'll just post like an album cover with like a little bit of a song, and I'm like, I have to then like screenshot it, do like the image search, and then try and
Oh, okay.
find it, and it's just a nightmare. But yeah, that's a digression, but that's the thing that I find strange with them is that I don't know what they're going to become, what their next album's going to be, because
No. They'll just be like straight up Dark Funeral on the next one, I reckon, like, or
Yeah.
Cradle of Filth or something.
Oh, Dark.
oh yeah, 'cause that would be, we saw Dark Funeral with Cannibal Corpse recently, and it was like Storm Ruler ingested Dark Funeral then Cannibal Corpse, and it was so weird because it was like I don't like when you go to gigs and the genres mix too much.
But it was good.
Mm.
I remember we saw Havoc, and it was like Ex Mortis, Gorod, who were more death metal, and then back to Warbringer and Havoc. So it was like thrash with some like death metal in the middle, and we were like, I don't like
I
this.
quite like varied lineups. It was just the fact that like Dark Funeral kind of put me to sleep. Like,
Yeah, same here. Like, me and my mates, while we were watching them, I mean, like, for a start, and it's just their costumes just make me laugh. Like, it's so funny that they're like coming out in these like suits of armor, taking themselves so serious. Like, mate, like we're playing metal. Like, just see the funny side of it. It's so dumb.
and
I think the weird thing was
we
ingested.
interviewed Lord Arahim or whatever from Dark Funeral, like at the gig, and it was one of the most uncomfortable 10 minutes of my life.
How come? Is he just like not happy to talk?
Oh no, he's absolutely as he is on stage, like in person, like taking himself incredibly seriously, and just it was just
Just because you thought he was the vocalist, and I was like, no, he's the guitar player.
Oh.
but that was like moderately embarrassing, but also it was just well, you picked up there was an atmosphere in the room that was just like uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Like,
I guess, yeah.
It was just bizarre.
But mine was just that Ingested had just played like their hometown crowd, and it was like
so
an
much
amazing
energy,
set.
yeah.
And then Dark Funeral came on, and it was kind of like, oh, I'm gonna go to the loo now. And then Cannibal Corpse came on, and were just great. And it was like, I don't feel like the lineup was great for that one.
But then you had Storm Ruler opening, who were a black metal band, but they were more like Dissection-esque and had like loads of energy. So
yeah, I'm with you on that with the mixed bills. I don't mind it to a degree, but it's like, you know, I'm going there for the headliner band. I want to come away like I either want to get my money's worth and see like other bands in that realm, or come away like a fan of something that's, you know, not similar, but, you know, like something that I'm going to come away liking. But then again, I guess maybe it's like, so they spread it out sometimes to get more of a cross section of people through the door. I don't know, but
only saw At the Gates with Behemoth and Wolves in the Throne Room, and that was like black metal mixed with death metal, and that was a pretty solid lineup.
Yeah, like that I could see, like, you know, that's kind of, it's all together, isn't it? It's a shorter part of the spectrum as opposed to like,
I suppose like Behemoth
wider
are more
ends.
like blackened death metal, so I guess that they kind of they kind of have a foot in both camps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just not trying to think of any more gigs I've been to that have just been really, really weird mashups of things. I can't off the top of my head. Anyway, we asked you for like 5 picks, which we'll play like on the radio alongside when we release the podcast. What those like 5 picks that like inspired Celestial Sanctuary as a band? What were those 5 picks? If you want to just take us through them. And
yeah, sure. I mean, this is really hard because I'm sure you get this like with other death metal bands that you interview, that it's very hard to pick ones that aren't marked with that E on the streaming services. But yeah, I think I managed a pretty good 5. I just had to write it down. Just bear with me. Yeah, so the first one is not my first experience of death metal, but one of the first like death metal bands that I properly got into was Carcass, and the album Heartwork I just remember hearing it, and at the time I was like, "Oh, who are these?" Like thinking they were a new band, and it was my mate John. I think he'd borrowed the CD off his like cousin, and we were listening to it in the car. And I just assumed, like I say, I assumed it was like some new band. And he was like, "Oh no, this came out like '93 or '94 or whatever, whenever it came out." I just couldn't believe like something sounded like A, the production sounded so good, and B, like they just sounded so like relevant. So like Heartwork was like the first album that I really sort of like delved into that was like, you know, fully extreme. And I just absolutely loved it. I love like, you know, I kind of still dabble in it, but I was a music video director for a good few years. And Heartwork, the music video for Heartwork was one that would always be like on my treatment or reference list of like, this is kind of like the vibe that I want to go for. So my first pick has to be the song Heartwork by Carcass. I know it's like the big single or whatever, but there's no denying that that's like such an incredible song. Plus as well, like I took my partner to see them in Norwich, and then when we saw them again at Download, and she like her sort of like, she's really into like extreme music. Like, you know, there's been times where she's like stuff that's heavier than what I could like, but death metal is something she's never really been into. She loves Gate Creeper. She loves. I'm struggling to think of another one, but she's always said like she hates Cannibal Corpse. So yeah, well, I took her to Carcass gig, and she came away and like she just loved it, and they're like one of her favorite bands as well. So it's kind of like a bit of a bonding moment, like especially when they played Heartwork. Obviously, it's quite a palatable song, I guess you could say. So it's kind of, yeah, just to be able to like bond over something that I loved as a teenager, to then sort of like pass that on to my partner now, who I'm getting married to next year, and it's like another new band that we can bond over, is just holds a good, like a precious place in my heart, so to speak.
For sure. That's congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Cheers.
I feel like Carcass are a good band like that, because I remember when I was a kid, I must have been like about 10. My dad's like, "Do you like Motorhead?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Here's Carcass." And I'm like, "Thanks."
Oh mate, your dad's a legend. That's insane.
He's okay.
Oh okay, yeah. His music taste sounds legendary.
His music taste is very good, but
yeah.
Not enough said about that. But yeah, like I love that era of Carcass, and I kind of think it's a bit sad that, oh god, I'm blanking on his name.
Ken, the drummer?
No, the guitarist went on to form Arch Enemy.
Oh,
Jeff Loomis.
No, isn't Jeff Loomis Michael Amott?
Oh.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad that, like, because I think it was just that and Black and
It's very early in the morning for you, isn't it?
yeah, it's the one with Black Star on it, but it's got a different title. Swan Song. Like, I think it was just Swan Song and Heartwork. That I'm usually like a metal encyclopedia, and this is just
So early, you've not had any caffeine yet.
Yeah, like it's kind of sad that those are kind of the only two albums that they made together, because I think like that era of kind of like melodic death metal was so impactful, and like it's not to trash Arch Enemy or anything, but it just doesn't hit the same way.
No. I mean, Matt, our other guitarist, he's been a death metal fan since he was a kid. And he keeps telling me to check out, I think there's a couple of like really early Arch Enemy albums. I've never really listened to Arch Enemy much at all, apart from probably a song that was on Kerrang in like 2004, whatever. But yeah, he's like, yeah, you got to check out like these two albums from like really early on. They're insane. Like, check them out. I've never trusted him, so I've never done
it. Yeah, like Arch Enemy have always just kind of like left me a bit cold, and
I like the early stuff, like that Nemesis thing, but
also the riff to Nemesis is good. It's just everything else just. But yeah, sorry, we tend to digress an awful lot. Like as soon as
that's cool.
But yeah. So, what is your second pick?
Right, my second one is these are kind of in no particular order, by the way. So another one I'm going to go for is "Nothing Is Not" by Morbid Angel. and Morbid Angel is kind of like, so there's a period. Sorry, my dog is just digging into the carpet. Yeah, there was a period of my life where I got like so jaded with music, I just sort of just stopped checking out anything new. I don't know if it's just a sort of symptom of like I've been playing in bands since I was like 14, 15. I'd been a music video director for years. I was kind of like sick of everything that I'd heard to a point. And then I was in a record shop, and I had started like collecting records. I'd started getting back into music. And like from my youth, there was like, for some reason, I just never, like, Morbid Angel had just always passed me by. I don't know why. Like, it's just one of those bands. I think it's either like at that time in life, I just didn't like their logo or something dumb like that. So yeah, I got Altars of Madness, and it kind of just like set me on this path of, going in and checking out loads of bands that I'd missed from my youth and stuff. And then Nothing Is Not, more specifically, is just like a song that I think you could draw direct lines of comparison with like how we write riffs and how we structure our songs. And it's just, yeah, it's an insane song, and it's from like the Steve Tucker era, which I think quite a few people like turn their nose up at for some reason. I think it is. Is it from Gateways? Oh no, sorry.
They're not a band that like I've got like. Is it Immortal Rights? The one that
the blue cover.
Yeah, the one that's like got the one that was painted by Christian Varland. Like, well,
which album was that? Sorry.
Oh, the Immortal Rights one. I've got that on vinyl.
Oh, okay.
That's like kind of. I think that's most people's entry to Morbid
That's
Angel.
more because you really like Christian Varland, don't you?
I bought it for the album artwork.
Oh, okay.
The guy that painted it, Christian Varland, he's probably like, like kind of the realm of metal, one of my favorite painters, maybe. But yeah, he did all like the classic Emperor Dissection, like all of those like classic extreme metal ones, and he did that Morbid Angel cover as well.
Oh, okay, sick. Yeah, I think like picking up a record purely based on the album artwork is like such a like good way to like find new bands, I think, and this is something that I think has probably been lost to a degree, not to people who still buy physical media, because I think that's just the way people like to approach it. But I think there's a lot of people that their only consumption of music is through digital, and I don't think you can really you can't really see the artwork as much on that tiny screen or whatever. But again, like, there's no no shade at people who don't buy physical media. I know that it's a luxury to be able to go out and buy records and to buy CDs and stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to clear that up. That I'm not saying like people
absolutely.
who don't.
Like,
but
it is a very expensive hobby.
Yeah. I mean, I have to, if a new records come through my door like weekly, so I kind of got to the point now where I'm like, got to put that away before the missus gets sort of thing. But yeah, it's Formulas Fated to the Flesh, not Gateways. Just in case any people want to come on here and listen to this and call me a poser for getting the album wrong. But yeah, my third one is I'm gonna go for like a more modern one. Just bear with. I need to get this note up again. Sorry, you're gonna have to edit this.
It's fine. They've been remarkably good today.
Yeah, so he's got two Dagoos called Fenris and Ted, who usually like to rattle the bars because it's so early. They're not.
They're actually really behaving themselves today.
You've got two what?
Dagoos.
Dagoos, what are they?
They're like gerbils but bigger.
Yeah, they're kind of like, they're more closely related to like chinchillas.
Okay.
And they have like the orange beaver teeth that never like stop growing, so they have to constantly be chewing things, and they have thumbs as well, so they can pick things up. And
oh, what? It's a whole species I've never heard of, which kind of would be very. This is a really good segue. So my next pick was actually Vitrification of Blood Part 1 and 2, and Part 2 is actually called Hidden Species. by Blood Incantation. Yeah, so like I'm always like sort of advocating, and I never want to be one of those people that like only looks to like vintage death metal as something that has influenced them. I'm very open about the fact that like new bands have influenced this band, you know, like Faceless Burial, for instance. They're like one of my favorite new bands. But yeah, those, and I say those two because there's like they did like a live album like record, and they play part 1 and part 2 back to back, and I just think it's such like, again, I think a lot of people, like if you mention the word progressive, people sort of like get a bit put off and maybe a bit like scared by that. But I think that's just such like a good demonstration of like absolutely like perfect progressive death metal. And while I wouldn't consider us like progressive in any sense of the word, maybe to a degree, but not in the sense that, you know, I think when people think of prog, they think of like 10-minute long songs and like a flute solo or whatever. But obviously progressive just means like moving the genre forward. And yeah, I think in terms of that record, Starspawn for a start is just an incredible record and a true modern classic. But yeah, those two songs back to back specifically are just perfection.
I just loved their like, you know, that Amoeba What's in My Bag, when Blood
Oh,
Incantation were on there, and hardly any of their records were metal records, and I love
oh
that.
yeah,
And then you get people
yeah.
in the comments complaining. It happened with Power Trip that guitarist Blake Ibanez picked like loads of like Britpop, and people are going, "How dare he pick Britpop?" And people are replying, going, "He's written some amazing like metal riffs over the years. Like he's been in like Power Trip, and he's in like Eternal Champion for a bit, and it's like if he wants to listen to Britpop, he's allowed."
I've also found that
Yeah.
like, the more interesting artists over the years and stuff like that that I've gotten into have been like influenced from like a myriad of different genres and not just like we interviewed Hellripper, which is like one of the really like a really exciting new band, and he's super into Britpop, and we spent like a good portion of the interview talking about how much we love Dire Straits as well.
Ah, Dire Straits, unbelievable. The what's that album with the lightning on the cover?
See, I
It's got Telegraph Road. Is it Telegraph Road or Tele something Road? Yeah,
uh,
that's one of my favorite albums of all time. I love Dire Straits. I love Pink Floyd as well. Like Pink Floyd, their album Division Bell. They shot the you know, the one with the two faces
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
facing each other. They shot that album cover like yards from where we like practice and stuff. Um, yeah, Pink Floyd had like a massive presence around here because Sid Sid and David Gilmour were from Ely and Cambridge and stuff like that. So yeah, there's always that thing around there. But yeah, that's sick that Hellripper like Dire Straits too.
Yeah, it was like he was going on about how like especially like the solo work that he was just like directly lifting from like in like the main single off the last album, like there was kind of like this solo, like lots of like trills and hammer-ons that was just his kind of like little tribute to Sultans of Swing.
Oh, that's amazing. I have to go back and listen to that now.
Yeah, it's in the song Knuckle of Eve.
Okay, I'm gonna go check that out.
Yeah,
was that all the picks, or was there
that
one
was
more?
only three, wasn't it?
Yeah, I got a couple more. So the next one is going to be I struggled with what song to pick, and obviously I just want to caveat this by saying that I wanted to pick a Cannibal Corpse song, but every song of theirs is marked with a knee. So I'm going to go with Death
Yeah.
instead,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going with the song Symbolic. I was going to go Flattening of Emotions as well, but yeah, Symbolic I think just has like more of a sort of like pivotal part in my life where, so a good friend of mine, Charlie, I just remember the day he was like, "Mate, you got to check out Symbolic by Death," and he was just like, "Listen to it and then like call me back." And so yeah, I listened to it. I was just like blown away by it. Went back and I just remember having like this, it was sort of like an hour-long conversation on the phone. I guess this is kind of like where podcasts come from. Yeah, just an hour-long conversation on the phone, like just buzzing about like how good it was and what a great discovery it was and stuff like that, and kind of just like being able to trace like bands that had like evolved from that, or where you could be like, oh my god, there's like so many bands that have like taken influence from this. The record as a whole symbolic, but yeah, just more specific. I'll just go with the song symbolic. um but yeah, so that's going to be my fourth pick. And then,
I mean
but yeah,
that's like a super that album was like really impactful for me as well, and then that's probably the Death's best era, just because like it had members of the prog band Cynic in it, and that like
yeah.
added like an entire new dimension to it, with like Sean Reinhardt on drums, and
Mm-hmm.
like yeah, like we used to cover Crystal Mountain, and I think for me that's kind of like, I know most people point towards Sound of Perseverance as kind of like Death's high point, but I think it came a little earlier with like those two albums that had like members of Cynic.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think, yeah, that progressive element that you mentioned is spot on. That it did, like, and as well, I think it just, as well as having like a sort of like prog sound, I think in terms of progression, it moved the genre forward as well, of what death metal could be. And I think that album probably, I don't know if I'm sort of like speaking out of term here, but that album probably was what you could consider like proto tech death metal.
Oh no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I can't think of anything kind of prior to that that was as boundary pushing,
No.
because it was early to mid 90s, I think.
Yeah. I want to say like 94, maybe 95.
Yes, and I can't think of anything kind of prior to that that was pushing itself that much in terms of like the arrangements of the songs, and yeah.
Yeah, because I guess like maybe Suffocation you could say, but I think they're more sort of like technicality probably came like a bit further down the line. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not so much of an encyclopedia, but yeah, I think their sort of like legacy is very much that, isn't it? That, you know, being technical, using different time signatures, like crazy arrangements that people weren't really doing. Maybe Metallica were in Injustice for All, but yeah.
Yeah, sweet. What's your last pick?
So yeah, another flawless segue from me here is going to be Harvester of Sorrow by Metallica. Just because, is I just picked that one on a whim, because Metallica are just like my favorite band of all time, and Justice for All is my favorite album of all time. I don't think there is an album that is better than And Justice for All. So yeah, Harvester of Sorrow I think is just so heavy. Like, it's just the tempo of it, the incorporation of like that sort of like moody, sort of like, swampy, but just that clean guitar in it is not sort of like, it's not shimmery and sparkly, it's just dark and moody. And yeah, everything about that song I love. It's just, and we've ripped off many riffs from that song like quite a few times.
I mean, like I think Injustice probably was kind of like the high point for Metallica, and they kind of, from that point on, it was sort of like a gradual decline, I think.
I like the Black Album, but you hate it, and I'm like, I don't think the Black Album is the start of the decline. I think the Black Album is.
So I don't think the Black Album is anywhere near the worst album that Metallica have made, but I do think it was sort of the beginning of that kind of decline into mediocrity, if that makes sense. Like in terms of like writing kind of more commercially appealing kind of radio rock, as opposed to, whereas they were actually sort of pushing boundaries and evolving as musicians on Injustice.
Yeah, I think like with the Blackout, because I'm with you on this. I absolutely love the Black Album, and I think it's one of my favorites as well. And I think the Black Album is better than Kill 'Em All, but that's a conversation for another day.
That is a spicy take.
Yeah. But yeah, in terms of like as an album, as something that you consume as an album, I think Black Album is just like such a great piece of like music. And I think the fact that they did more with less in terms of like, you know, not the riffs are simpler, the song structures are kind of simpler, but yeah, they just did like so much by like simplifying what they were doing. And I think, yeah, it's kind of like it was a turn, but I don't think it was a decline for them. And then I think, yeah, their best album is obviously no, I'm not even going to say it. You know what's coming. It's not Saint Anger.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were gonna like kind of reveal yourself as like a Lulu stan or something.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I
I
do.
I I've never listened to Lulu because I just the brief bits I've heard were just so grating to me. I was like, I can't sit through this from start to finish.
It was I listened to the whole thing when it came out. It was something.
You did the whole thing.
I forced myself to because it came out around the time where I first attempted to launch like a metal YouTube channel, and I was like, I'm gonna review this. Did the whole thing and just did not have any gas in the tank left to write a review or do anything.
Oh my god, yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, like on paper, it sounds like such a good idea for if you're a music fan, if you love music and you just love all corners of music.
Mm.
It's such a good idea on paper. Like Metallica and is it Lou Reed? Is that who
Yeah.
it was? Yeah. Like, you know, that could have been amazing. It could have been something that went down in history as something really good. But yeah, I remember. I mean, I was never really like a. He was a singer in Velvet Underground, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I was never really much of a fan of theirs, but checked it out because I was like, this could be something I love. Like, I think 2 minutes in, I was like, what the is this?
Well, I think like I've always kind of viewed it in this context, and it might be wrong, but like because like Metallica have kind of like moved beyond the realms of kind of like metal, and that they're rubbing shoulders now with kind of like Hollywood elites and kind of like that a more kind of like they kind of wanted more of a feather in their cap, like something a bit more avant-garde, so they could maybe be respected in the circles they're currently running in, which is why I think that project came about, and then it just did not pan out the way that I think they were hoping.
No, not at all. And yeah, I think like obviously it's definitely Lars's idea,
Yeah,
and I think yeah, Lars is. I would say he's a true artist in that sense that he's trying stuff. He's not sticking to a lane. He's doing what he wants and what he think might work. And it's another opportunity to sell a load of records, I guess.
yeah.
And
I mean, like my first recommendation would be maybe practicing drums occasionally.
My thing though is off the newest Metallica record, my favorite songs were the last two songs where they were more like sort of
New wave for British
yeah.
heavy metal. They were kind of wearing those influences on this, and same, yeah, like they were, but yeah, it was kind of it was really bad that even at the not Glastonbury, was it download? Yeah, a download. They when they released the footage, they actually like had to like dub over Lars's drums.
Did they?
Like in like the double kick section in one, somebody put footage taken at download there and compared it to what was actually put out like for the download YouTube channel, and they actually had to overdub it because it was not great.
I mean, there has been a period. What year was that? Down was that quite a few years ago now?
Oh no, it was this year.
This year? Oh,
yeah. They had to overdub Lars's drums because he just wasn't. It wasn't even just that it was tight, and I know that he simplifies a lot of the drum parts now, but it just sounded so sloppy and kind of stripped back that they ended up just overdubbing it. Which
yeah,
is
I'm not surprised.
Really bad.
My thing with Lars is that, like, apart from download this year, because while I was there, I did think like, ugh, and that's the first time I've ever thought that with him. And I think like, James is back to being sort of like full strength, I guess you could say. But for years, like I think like Lars was the one like holding it down, and there's been so many times where I'd come away like thinking like people give Lars like a lot of like grief or whatever, but he's the one who is still like to me he seemed like he was like still practicing. He was still like hitting hard, still, and I think as well, like, and I always say this, that if instead of mucking around with doing these, like having to play like a different set every night, if they just did what every other band did for maybe just one tour, and just did like, this is the set for the entirety of the tour, and just learnt those songs like the tightest they could be, I think he'd blow people away with like how good he is. But it's just this like trying to remember like 60 songs and like changing them in and out. It's like, yeah, no wonder you're going to get like knackered, start forgetting stuff and not playing it like the best you can.
I might be wrong, but I think I read somewhere that he just fully admits that he doesn't practice anymore, though.
Oh, I was referring to like a few years ago,
Oh,
not
okay.
like more recent times. Yeah, just because there was like a peak where people were like giving him grief, but he was like the tightest member of the band for a very long time.
Yeah, because I've never actually seen Metallica live because I've just never got around to
I've
it.
seen them once, and that was Download 2030, the year Sabbath were also headlining.
That was 2012. That was the Black Album set where they played it in reverse.
Yeah. That was the one and only time I saw Metallica, and I was on the barrier for it at Download, and that was an experience.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's
I have,
amazing. That was an amazing one. I've seen them. This year was my 10th time seeing them. Yeah, absolutely love them. Never saw him with Jason or Cliff, obviously, but
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like I still have a lot of love for them, but I am. Yeah, it's been a ride being a Metallica fan for the last 15 years. Like,
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of lore to get your head around.
Yeah.
yeah.
My funniest thing with Metallica is that my mum was a big Metallica fan in the 80s. And then her mum was always like, no one's going to listen to them when in a few years. And then when I started listening to them when I was 12, my mum was like, look.
Oh,
Was
Yeah.
that like before? Was that before or after they made her burn all of the records?
This was a different
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
But yeah.
wait, your mum had to burn all her records?
I don't know. My mum and dad met at some church or something.
It
I'm
sounded
not
like a bit of a
religious.
cult, to be honest.
And my mum had loads of records, and those records are gone. I don't know what happened to them.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I could have had
That's-
like all these first pressings of really good albums, and then I don't know.
Ah, yeah.
I've just got things that I bought in crap condition from like
Proper Bible Belt behavior, though.
I know. Yeah.
But yeah, very conscious of the fact that you've got work and other sort of like priorities. So, would you like to kind of like just wrapping up, is there anything you'd like to plug? Obviously the new album's coming out, and kind of tell people when they can pick that up and etc.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, in our new album, Insatiable Thirst For Torment, obviously comes out this month, which is wild to think that it's this month. It's just such a long process, and yeah, these last the last few weeks and the run up are just absolutely flying by. But yeah, it comes out August 25th. Really excited for everyone to hear it. I don't know if you two have heard it yet, if you would have got like a press link or anything
We
like
haven't
that.
received a
got
press
one, no.
link, but if
you want to send one
if
over,
you want to send one over and we can write
Yeah.
a review for the website, we'd
Yeah,
be
of course.
happy to do that.
Yeah, I'll send it over after this call.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
But yeah, apart from that, obviously you can go out and pre-order that whenever you want. I would just say like support underground music, support extreme bands. We're all going to be dead one day, so enjoy it while you can. Don't be a melt. Enjoy going to shows and just love one another.
That is to borrow a quote from our good friend Jake, metal is love.
Metal is love. He's right.